Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I post multiple reviews as well as retrospectives every week, so come check out the channel. This week I dropped a review for the newest season of True Detective, as well as my retrospective for The Incredible Hulk. Currently we're jumping back through the MCU with my MCU retrospective series. You can check out the current installments in that series on the channel, as well as all of the movie and series reviews I've done thus far. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and of course, tell your friends if you haven't. I greatly appreciate any and all support. And with that out of the way, let's dive into Napoleon. To me, Ridley Scott falls into the same category as a director like Zack Snyder does for most people. From what I can gather, you either really like him or you think he's highly overrated. I kind of hold a different opinion. I think Scott is an extremely talented director, but I do think his work is wildly inconsistent. Alien is a staple in the sci-fi horror flick realm. Gladiator is a classic. Blade Runner is an absolute revolutionary film that helped change the landscape of cinema forever. Even Matchstick Men is vastly underrated. If you haven't seen Matchstick Men, check it out. It's fantastic. But then we get to movies like A Good Year, Robin Hood, or All the Money in the World, or Body of Lies. I mean, the list goes on. I like Ridley Scott a lot, and although he is responsible for a handful of films that have greatly altered the course of movies, he also boasts quite a catalog of completely average films as well. He's a difficult director to respect sometimes because when he hits, he knocks it out of the park. But when he misses, you can't help but think, this is the same guy who directed The Martian? As someone who firmly believes that directors deserve to let their movies be seen the way they intended, I do think Scott is one of those directors where the studio's producers maybe should tighten the leash a little bit. I think ultimately, that's the most glaring issue with Napoleon. Full disclosure before we get any further, I did not care for this movie. I think Scott was given too much freedom. This film, it's too much. It's hindered by the same problem that I think a lot of historical biopics are affected by, which is a lack of focus. They try to cover too much of their subject's life, accomplishments, and failures in such a brief stint of time. But that isn't the only problem. This movie is just sort of strange. Let's talk about Joaquin Phoenix. Great actor, absolutely. And what I'm about to say is probably not his fault, and it may seem like such a minor and unnecessary complaint, but for me, I absolutely despise when the stars of biopics or historical films do not do their subject's accent. It drives me insane. It seems minuscule, I know, but it takes me out of the movie almost immediately. And I knew after watching the initial trailer for this movie that I was going to be driven mad by this. It's just weird. We all know who Napoleon was. He was French. You cast Joaquin Phoenix. Fine, he's an actor. Act. I don't care. This movie is for an English-speaking audience. I get it. I'm not saying that we need an all-French cast speaking French the entire movie. That's not what I'm asking for. But it's just so jarring listening to Phoenix just speak with an American English accent, knowing who this historical figure was and the person he's portraying. It's made even worse when the entire cast around him speaks in a British, French, or even Russian accent. Like, what are we doing? It's like they aren't even trying. I hated it. It may seem ridiculous, but I absolutely hated it. It just kind of makes the movie seem amateur or more like a joke to me. And this isn't the only awkward aspect of this film. Over the course of the 2.5-hour runtime, I could never quite decipher whether or not I was watching a serious historical drama or a parody. There was just this aura, the way the film is written, the dialogue, the direction, the way Phoenix portrays Napoleon. There were many sections of this movie where I felt like the movie wanted to be a historical black comedy, a la Death of Stalin. The film doesn't seem to know what it wants to be and is in constant conflict with itself. It makes it hard to settle in and just enjoy the story because you're unsure if you're supposed to laugh or ponder a dramatic moment. And the story. As I outlined at the beginning of this review, my biggest issue with films like Napoleon is that they just try to do too much. Like many historical biopics that came before it, Napoleon spreads itself too thin as it attempts to encompass the subject's whole life in the matter of 2.5 hours. Because of this, the story in the film ultimately just lacks focus. You never quite connect with any character or any scene that plays out on screen because the movie moves at such a brisk pace. It's as if you're being shown a visual timeline of Napoleon's life with no extensive context to add weight to any one moment. Scott never spends enough time in one single moment before he pulls you off into the next chapter of Napoleon's life. One aspect of the film I will commend Scott on is the action sequences, and there's no shortage of them. Scott has been a master at directing action since his heyday, and he continues to excel in that facet of his trade. In fact, he's even gotten better. The action sequences in Napoleon are unique, exhilarating, and epic. Those were my favorite moments of this film, far and away. The Battle of Austerlitz is especially enjoyable as Napoleon outwits the Austrian and Russian forces, sinking them into an icy lake as they attempt to flee. I've always appreciated Ridley Scott despite the fact that he tends to be such an erratic director. He continues to impress with how he approaches, designs, and executes his grand action sequences. They are a spectacle to behold. Unfortunately, those remain the only real enjoyable segments of this movie. I understand what Scott was going for. Napoleon is a fascinating historical figure, to say the least. The idea of crafting a film around the egocentric character is a compelling one, but Scott prioritizes highlighting every single moment of Napoleon's rise and fall, and the film ultimately collapses under the weight of the story. These historical biopics succeed when they choose to focus on 3 or even 4 major stages in their subject's life. And that's what the writer David Scarpa and Scott should have set their sights on. Instead, we got a bloated, unintentionally funny, lumbering mess of a film that would have been better suited as a miniseries. After The Last Duel and The House of Gucci, I thought maybe we were about to embark on another Ridley Scott hot streak. And who knows, maybe Gladiator 2 will serve as that launching pad for the next run. At least, I hope it does.